we are here to tell you about some of the things we're doing currently at Drexel. In particular, we're excited to share with you the kind of content and a little bit of the content and some of the initial outcomes from a remote scalable training program for mental health providers to treat autistic youth. It's called the SPIRIT program. I'll explain the acronym in a bit. But we're really excited to be here and tell you about it. This is a collaboration between us as well as Lauren Moskowitz at St. John's University and Rebecca Sachs, who's in private practice. So our agenda for today is we're going to first just do a very quick discussion review of the mental health needs of autistic youth and those with ID. Quick because I know in this audience of all audiences, we probably don't need to do much to convince you that these needs are present, important, and deeply underserved. We're going to talk a little bit about the current status of CBT as an approach to address these needs. And then we're going to tell you about the SPIRIT program. And we're going to give you a kind of a sampler pack of a few key elements of the program and how it works, and then tell you about the preliminary results of a kind of QA type evaluation that we've been doing of this program with a large group of mental health providers in New York State. That's sort of right kind of in the middle of that process at the moment. We're going to talk about where we're going to go from here, but mostly we want to do this to leave enough time, hopefully about 10 minutes or so, for Q&A and discussion today. So autistic youth have significant and substantial mental health needs, depending on your estimates, depending on your way of quantifying this. We're talking about 70 or 80%. These elevated rates are kind of evident across the spectrum as well. Actually, a paper that Carla and I wrote about 10 years ago in an early iteration of the AIC data set, we took a look at this and found similarly that even in really high support need samples, we still see elevated rates of these concerns. The sort of old, very much outmoded notion that somehow autism or ID, quote unquote, protect people from other mental health concerns is not only not true, but the opposite of true. As a result, this is a population with some of the highest mental health service needs of all youth populations as a proportion of the total population. But yet these needs dramatically often end up being underserved and unmet in the community. Allison?
So probably also not unfamiliar to this audience, cognitive behavioral therapy has kind of some of the strongest evidence base of efficacy for reducing co-occurring symptoms in autistic youth. Particularly, kind of the most research has been around anxiety disorders. Matt, if you could click.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. However, its use in community settings, kind of to the general population, remains limited, and some research has suggested that that's due to providers reporting that they don't have the requisite skills to work with autistic individuals, and will even kind of turn away cases presenting at the clinic for conditions that they treat upon hearing that the patient has autism, kind of stating that they don't feel adequately prepared or trained, despite kind of having that basic CBT evidence-based background.
So this leads now to essentially a classic access gap, right? Where there's a substantial need. There are services, there are approaches that can be helpful in at least many cases, but people are not getting them. And this really comes down to a few different factors. First of all, provider confidence. It's a in several different community studies now, individuals say they just don't feel confident to treat autistic folks when they arrive at their door, as well as really a sense of competence, actually knowing literally what to do, even if they do feel like I can do it. I feel like I could, but what do I do now when autistic youth show up for services? Some of this comes down to, or many folks report a lack of knowledge or expertise to tailor what they know to the autistic population, right? This distinction between, do I need to know something new or different or specific? Do I need to buy a whole other manual back here, or can I at least at minimum adapt some skills that I already have as an existing youth mental health provider and make that work? And as a result, the services and training are often really siloed from the broader community where folks are seeking treatment. Folks need to come to centers and universities like ours that are sort of known, and yours, right, that are known for this as a way to access services if they can at all. And I think the stat that always jumps out at me is the fact that a majority of providers will actually turn away autistic youth, at least according to some studies. Mathematics had a study in 2021, actually in New York State, that showed this, where even if somebody says, I treat anxiety in youth, that's what I hang up on my shingle. I invite a child in for an intake. I get halfway through the intake and I say, oh, wait, you said autism? I'm sorry, I can't help you. And then the child in the family will be shown the door and said, you need specialized treatment. And, this is a story that so many of us have seen and see all the time. I've seen it in training clinics where I've been as a core faculty member, where, they'll say, gosh, we can't help these kids, right? And, that really is part of what inspired development of this training and earlier iterations of it, where we kept saying, well, no, you don't have to turn them away. There are things you can do to make a difference based on the skills that you have. So the question is, how can we address that need? How can we fill that gap, particularly in terms of improving competence and confidence in treating autistic youth via an approach that is brief and accessible and can be also accomplished by busy mental health providers who don't necessarily have the time to allocate weeks to get retrained, or months or years to get retrained in the ways that sometimes they think. So this led to the development of the Spirit IDA, or Spirit, I'm going to just call it Spirit for short, training model for this, to try to address this challenge. So this is our core team. Again, SPIRIT stands for Scalable Psychopathology Intervention Intensive Training, because a good acronym. Call me there. For ID and autism, and this is our core both development and implementation team. The program, very briefly, originally actually came out of a series of presentations that Laura Moskowitz, Rebecca Sachs, and Dina Gassner and I did at ABCT and then at other conferences, where we would sort of just do little mini versions of this and saying, hey, look, can we just show you? Let's do a clinical demonstration of what it would be to do a session of exposures or a session of cognitive restructuring or parent training with somebody on the spectrum. And consistently, the response that we got when folks would show up, and a lot of folks would show up, is, gosh, that doesn't seem that as different as I thought it would be. Or wow, I didn't realize if I could just, think about things like my pacing or use of visuals or other approaches, I can do this too. And so we said, yeah, you can do this too. And so thankfully there was a call a couple of years ago, actually up in New York, to sort of develop and package up a training that can be used in this way. We're fortunate to have Allison come on board as well to be part of this development and implementation process. And we were able to push this out into the world. I think a key aspect of this co-development process too is the co-design and co-delivery by not just clinicians with clinical expertise, but also autistic individuals and scholars with lived experience, both as providers, but also as receivers of these interventions, right? Folks who said, gosh, I've been on the other side of this, and there are things that you are saying, thinking, and presuming that, well, maybe empirically supported and efficacious, you might want to rethink how you're doing it in terms of how it's really, experienced by the person um, who you're treating. So as I said, it was originally developed for the New York State Office of Mental Health for a statewide federally funded effort to scale up access to mental health care for this population. There was an identified need, and there still is deeply across that state. Specifically to address confidence and competence in using CBT principles and approaches for autistic youth. And as I said, it's co-designed and co-developed with autistic scholars and non-autistic clinicians. So I'm going to just give you a brief summary of the structure of how this program works and looks, and then we're going to kind of do a deep dive over the next few minutes. We have currently delivered this program in this format to 200, actually to I guess now about 300 mental health providers. The first half or so are what I'm going to be reporting data on today. Again, that's primarily in New York State, although we are now finally, I'm proud to say, as of like this week, in a position to be offering this in Pennsylvania and actually nationwide too. So the Spirit program is structured as a basic course, and then which is larger, and then a more tailored and focused advanced course. So the basic course aims to train folks to learn the core features of autism and ID that can impact mental health treatment, learn key differences and similarities in how you apply CBT to co-occurring conditions, and to demonstrate some basic ability to apply this knowledge. It's just 10 hours delivered over 7 weeks with an alternating synchronous and asynchronous structure. So we have online asynchronous self-paced modules that we kind of walk and talk folks through that we developed over many months. And then in between them, we have in-person sessions that are co-run by members of our leadership team or others trained as Spirit trainers to kind of discuss that content, go a little bit deeper, and answer some questions. We train those cohorts of about 40 clinicians at a time, and again, co-taught by clinical experts and autistic clinicians. Again, so really trying to infuse this lived experience approach through the development and implementation of all cohorts and iterations of the program. Then, if folks are interested in kind of going deeper, there's an advanced course, which is component, which is structured as a case consultation series. So essentially, I'll get to the numbers in a second, but folks who are in the basic course about halfway through can apply, at least that's the current structure, to do the advanced course. And basically the application involves just saying, hey, I'm going to actually do the basic course and complete all the materials, and I commit to maintaining at least one autistic individual, hopefully more, on my caseload starting now and through the advanced course sequence, because it's more of a case consultation approach. We then select at this point up to 8 of those 40 to proceed into that component of the course. So the advanced course has 3 aims: so articulating and providing examples of how to apply CBT and to treat co-occurring mental health conditions, active demonstration of the ability to do it, and then application of the knowledge learned from the training to actually treat co-occurring mental health conditions and folks on the spectrum. So it's scheduled as just 1 hour once a month for now currently 4, 6, or 8-month versions. And it's all synchronous online. And it really does kind of structure more like traditional case consultation, where folks in advance, usually in the first couple of sessions, will talk about a case that they might want to bring in or might want to talk about. And then we tap them and say, look, for this coming month, you're going to be presenting, and we give them kind of a case presentation structure. And then we do it as a kind of guided collaborative discussion. But ideally, over the course of those 4, 6, or 8 months, what we start to do is in best case, fade away some of the contributions of some of us as the leaders, and allow allow folks to kind of co-lead and learn from each other as well. So this is, as I said, 8 clinicians at a time, co-taught by the team clinical experts. So now we want to tell you a little bit about some of the key elements of this program. So there are 4, we kind of frame how to think about autism through the lens of delivering CBT and modifications one might make. We focus on what we call these sort of 4 key differences in how autistic folks experience and process the world that you might want to respond to. So first one is thinking differences. So this could be rigidity of thinking, or requiring things to be more literal or concrete. It could also involve sort of the pacing and processing of the information that's being provided, as well as how to make sure that you're kind of taking abstractions and making them meaningful, and then also understanding some of the downstream implications of some of those thinking differences to a person's daily life. The next one is social information processing differences. So one thing we do know from a lot of the empirical literature, of course, is that folks on the spectrum often do have strong and evident and really resonant ability to sort of read and follow the sort of social space of others, but the sort of efficiency or timing of that, the sort of catching and keeping up with that ebb and flow of social discussion, of the sort of Sturm und Drang and back and forth of the sort of subtleties of cues can be a lot to manage. And so thinking about how to boil down the social components of the clinical session to make them accessible, to sort of strip away the pieces that are extraneous and focus on what really sort of matters in that interaction becomes really crucial. Allison?
I think kind of related to, I think the emotional information processing differences is something that this center is very well aware of, and is at the forefront of researching and understanding. But that those information processing differences around emotional, input and output kind of play out both in multiple elements of the therapeutic process when it comes to CBT, where, a kind of a core part of many kind of standard manualized CBT programs is emotion identification as that first skill. And so, I've seen kind of manuals of kids coming to me who had seen prior therapists where they just got stuck on, we couldn't get past the emotion identification and we don't know what to do now. It's like this kid couldn't identify emotions, so like we don't know how to treat him. Instead of kind of recognizing that how emotions get described and felt and expressed, may look, different in autistic individuals, and we need to kind of adapt, what we're doing therapeutically based on the needs of the person in front of us. And it's similarly with, sensory motor and interoception information processing differences, as, the kind of sensory sensitivities are, part of the DSM-5 criteria, um, as well as, there's been, research on kind of broader sensory motor and interoception differences. These may be kind of, triggers as well as, you know, ways to self-soothe, as well as kind of manifestations of emotions or coping strategies that may look, is going to look different for autistic individuals. So both for kind of how we set up the therapy, room and environment, but also thinking about when our clients are in the real world, kind of things that may be, kind of an antecedent or a trigger for whatever experience they're having, maybe factors that clinicians aren't used to considering because it's not on their radar with more neurotypical patients. So broadly, what we kind of encourage with the framework that we use in this training is to be focused, kind of thinking of autism as a different way of experiencing the world, and focusing treatment on the co-occurring mental health treatment goals, whether it be anxiety or OCD, or another mental health disorder, and thinking about the autism as a way of kind of, this is just how someone's understanding and experiencing the world differently, and how can we fit what we want, the skills that we want them to learn, or the strategies that we want them to learn to manage their mental health conditions within this framework or this context. So, what this looks like when it comes to adapting CBT. When we think about kind of the critical components for CBT for anxiety or OCD, it starts with an assessment where you're getting background information, developing kind of a hierarchy of fears or obsessions and compulsions, then getting into psychoeducation, someone define what anxiety is, helping them identify their physical symptoms, recognizing any automatic thoughts or non-helpful thoughts, then working into practice of kind of challenging cognitions, challenging unhelpful thoughts, and developing more helpful coping thoughts. And then, what's considered the kind of key component of anxiety and OCD treatment is exposure. Having individuals kind of build up a hierarchy of, the things that they're scared of, and kind of forced to change and face and challenge those anxious cognitions, without avoiding and without engaging in compulsions. And the goal is really to encourage individuals to face their fears, and to either kind of get just confirming evidence that what they were scared of didn't occur, or to be able to learn to tolerate that it's uncomfortable, but it's not dangerous, we can survive it. When we're thinking about CBT with autistic individuals or individuals ID, we want to have these same all these same elements there. But thinking about the characteristics of autism, we want to bring that knowledge in. So, individuals with autism may have, intense interests or passions. This is a great way to be able to incorporate special interests into treatment. Thinking about kind of that concrete, literal black and white thinking that Matt was referring to earlier. A lot of times it involves kind of taking things out of the verbal domain and using more kind of concrete visual strategies and avoiding metaphors. So what I've done with kids is, instead of kind of like a regular SUDS scale, I actually had them get Legos out and have, use Legos to be able to physically see the difference between, like, okay, a little amount of Legos and a big amount of Legos. Like, are we feeling a little scared or big scared? With kind of preference for seamless and different difficulty with transitions, big piece that we'll go into in a little bit is, increasing structure and predictability when delivering treatment components, having an agenda and a kind of set pattern and structure that, individuals will follow and can come to expect, knowing, kind of knowing that, okay, if it's going to be, there's a lot of things in the environment that in the world that we can't change, but if the therapeutic environment can be a place that's predictable and controllable in certain ways, that can always be helpful. Um, there's common difficulty generalizing skills that are learned. So a lot of times for youth, that involves kind of increased caregiver and family and school involvement to promote generalization kind of outside the therapy room and into other environments. With executive functioning differences, an adaptation is adding more repetition and practice, kind of simplifying activities, and having specific goals or targeting that cognitive inflexibility, that cognitive rigidity, and making that kind of an explicit, treatment target when it comes to if it's something that the child identifies as getting in their way. Um, some of what Matt was mentioning in regards to differences with kind of neurotypical social emotional reciprocity. Um, we can modify CBT by, sometimes using video modeling or peer modeling to teach new skills as long as they're, aligned with the child's goals. Um, you know, both kind of, as he mentioned earlier, kind of stripping away, like what is the non-essential social, pieces of the kind of therapeutic interaction that we maybe don't need in there because it's kind of too much for someone to process, but then also kind of allowing for that additional practice sometimes by having, video modeling or peer modeling that can be that additional reference for someone to refer to. Um, the kind of assistance on adherence to rules. Sometimes we can capitalize on that rule-oriented nature by kind of coming up with a new rule that we're going to follow, or having kind of rules session that, can kind of set the tone of, it's a rule that we spend this much time, that we practice one thing or we spend this much time on this activity. Um, and, lastly, kind of there can be kind of higher levels of intolerance of uncertainty. So that's also something that we often want to target in CBT of having, specifically exposures to, uncertain situations and targeting emotion regulations while in those uncertain situations. So kind of the framework that in the training we teach providers to use um, is a called the prevent, respond, teach model. So kind of teaching strategies to prevent kind of challenges and promote more adaptive behaviors by changing circumstances. So finding kind of what are the optimal things we could do ahead of time that set up this person for success, teaching, the client ways to get what they need and replace, maladaptive behaviors with more helpful behaviors that serve the same function or purpose. And then also, teaching others to respond in ways that encourage kind of future or helpful, more adaptive, brave behaviors and discourage the unhelpful, anxious, avoidant behaviors. So kind of some examples of this for kind of prevention strategies are, around increasing predictability and understanding. So having visual cues, a concrete kind of example of, an adaptation that we specifically, might make for autistic clients or clients with ID that we may not typically see in neurotypical treatment is really incorporating kind of special interests and strong practices in treatment and pairing them with kind of, as the anti-anxiety stimuli. So, having a child with a really, really strong interest, that becomes the best reinforcer that we can have. Not just, and it has to kind of be selectively just for, in this circumstance, this is all we're going to use. They don't get it otherwise. But if you face this really terrifying, horrible thing, that you're terrified of, then you get access to your absolute favorite thing. If we're giving the reward after they engage in the brave behavior, then that's a reinforcer. So that would be a response strategy. But we can also like reinforce youth during or while they're engaging in a brave challenge as a prevention strategy. So and kind of changing that pairing of oh, this thing that I'm terrified of, now we can kind of change that parent to something associated with something that they like. So, example is of a kid who, when family would kind of was driving and they changed directions from a direction that they did not want the family to go, um, would get really upset and anxious. But he had a favorite Dr. Seuss book. And so it then became, okay, if I'm in the car, that's the only time I get to listen to the audiobook of my favorite Dr. Seuss book. And I get to read it in the car and hear my favorite thing, even though my parents are doing something scary, which is driving, different directions that I didn't want them to. Similarly, kid who was scared of hearing the happy birthday song sung, got to, first start with just having his favorite pop-up toy with him, as like first there was just a cake nearby and then, a little bit of music, until he was able to kind of increase and tolerate being able to hear the birthday song sung for longer. Or kind of, incorporating interests into the exposure themselves. So for a kid who likes Legos, developing, having like a Lego play needle, so that it has the thing that their most favorite thing is as part of, the scary thing that they have to do, which is get a shot.
If I can jump in on that too, I think, one big difference, because some of this might seem familiar for those who are treating, anxiety in kids, and obviously, we're not talking about anything that's radically different. I think the kind of difference that we highlight here when we're doing spirit might be talking about saying things like, the pervasiveness with which we include the special interest is much broader than we might do with a non-autistic child. So for example, we did a role play of this at ABCT just a couple weeks ago, and used the example of the movie series The Descendants, and we were role playing this exact scenario, and we literally brought costumes and dressed up in Descendants costumes and had toys, and the entire exposure, start to finish, was all about being in the Descendant space, and that is a good example of the kind of thing, and I think this Lego Nido example too, of something that is a little bit different than what you would be if you were doing sort of classical, CBT exposure, or if you're doing exposure response prevention for OCD, right? Where you maybe you want to be more targeted and selective, as having it only be a part of a reinforcer after a success, because for folks on the spectrum, they might need that we could, in behavioral terms, sort of counter conditioning component to be able to succeed and have that experience of saying, okay, I tried this is a lot, but I did it and I was able to do it and have fun, and then getting over that initial hump is something that many folks on the spectrum really struggle to do, and this provides a venue for doing that in a way that can feel good for them and can feel validating of the things that they care about. Allison, do you want to do this
I
one, or
think
should we
for the
do?
sake of time, we
Yeah,
probably need to go to the.
yeah, cool. I was thinking the same thing. So we've got a few more elements that we would like to share with you, and we have a little bit at the end if folks want to go back or talk about specific examples. Here's some of the sort of general kind of principles we're talking about, right? Making neurodivergent affirming adjustments to the environment, thinking about really taking seriously the importance of the sensory space, making sure that folks can communicate on their own terms. So if somebody intermittently, for instance, needs to communicate with AAC, allowing sure that is available, particularly if they're feeling stressed, which might be a time that somebody's language ability might be less available to them. We talked about reducing unnecessary demands, incorporating special interests, and the other elements to get back to. So I want to take a couple of minutes and then leave time for questions, but I want to talk about results of our initial evaluation. So in this first iteration, the first half of the New York State OMH project, we looked at the first 168 community mental health providers. We are currently cleaning the data for the remaining 132 to get, and we'll be able to report on all those soon. But for this, we basically just took some data before and after their participation in basic intervention and for the basic training, and then also did some periodic evaluation during the advanced, looking at things like their own perception of their own confidence, perception of their own competence, and then in the advanced training, use of the specific skills that we're actually training them in, as opposed to other skills. Are they actually saying they're doing those things? And then engagement, usefulness, outreach. Essentially, are they telling us that they're starting to more actively embrace on their caseload, folks on the spectrum, and then their own qualitative responses. So use just basic regressions in ANOVA for pre-post change, and repeated measures ANOVA for repeated measure models. So in terms of enrollment, we had 168 trainees in the basic course, as I said. 86% participated actively across all cohorts. About 80% remained engaged, at least by virtue of using the online discussion board. So they didn't just sort of log in and then log off. So overall, the vast majority were enrolled. Who enrolled were engaged, retained, and engaged. And then in terms of confidence and competence, so we asked them about their own perception of their confidence in treating mental health problems in autistic youth, as well as their sense of their own competence to do so. And we saw significant increases in these three posts. So again, these are, for those who are not familiar, these are violin plots, right? So this is the whole distribution. This is the mean pre, mean post, mean pre, mean post. And this is showing the range is smaller. Same thing in specifically using CBT to treat mental health problems in autistic youth. So again, significant increase pre and post. And then I know we were focusing more on the autism piece for this audience, but importantly, this all we talk about being able to use these principles with folks with ID as well, and of course folks with ID and autistic youth. And we see a similar increase in confidence and competence to treat mental health problems and to use CBT to do this. And then in terms of the advanced training, we saw high levels of willingness to work with autistic clients kind of at the beginning already, and folks with ID. But again, that's not surprising because, as a reminder, that's sort of part of the selection criteria. So, they needed to already be taking folks onto their caseload to be able to participate in the advanced training. And they did, but they remained willing. In terms of marketing, so again, we asked people essentially afterwards, are you stating on your flyers, on your social media postings for your clinic, on your website, publicly, that you are that you will accept autistic folks or folks with ID at your clinic, because of course that's how people get referred to you. And then finally, in terms of clients seen, again, similar point where folks already were pretty high in terms of taking folks onto their caseloads to begin with, but these numbers stayed the same or went up in all cases, and they did reduce a little bit in terms of number of folks on their caseload, so they dropped. So they're actually taking and keeping folks on their caseload already. And then finally, in terms of strategies as well, of the 23 strategies, we saw significant increases that we asked about in how often they reported using the that we most, such as in our intervention, as well as significant increases across 21 strategies and how well they believe they did this. And these increases maintained even at 1 month follow-up after the advanced training. And in terms of social validity, we generally saw very high endorsement in terms of reporting clear understanding of how to implement CBT for autistic youth, that they found the treatment to be acceptable and effective. They stated they believe that there were going to be permanent improvements in their ability to implement CBT, that they thought they liked the strategies, and they would recommend it to other people, which was nice. And our social validity responses generally, gave us some good warm fuzzies. But this really was representative of the kinds of responses we got, which was really, really nice to see. I've been giving a lot of different trainings that have not gone as well. I think this reinforced it, and I would say, a big piece of that, I think, was the fact that we, in each of these examples and all the iterations, anytime we had a comment from a clinician running the program, we also had the sort of counter comment or sort of modification, from autistic individuals with experience, sort of saying, hey, have you thought about it this way? Or have you thought, is this the right priority for this person? Have you really taken the time to ask the child, is that what they care about? Is that what they want? Just as the kinds of examples of reframes that I think that folks don't often get, just sort of learning skills trainings on them. So, overall preliminary results were that provider self-reported confidence and competence increased and remained higher after advanced training, and that they reported increased use of the specific strategies that we trained them in. So finally, our we have very initial preliminary evidence, first 168 providers, that this brief online training can increase competence and confidence to treat autistic youth, including but maybe not just specific to CBT. So meaning we don't know if they just felt that way in general, or because we didn't ask about other modalities other than CBT. Generally, it was well received, and there was positive engagement. So, big question going forward, of course, that we want to continue to study is translation to action. Ideally, we want to look into getting funding to, for instance, take fidelity measurement, or be able to, observe sessions more directly in code implementation. We'd like to be able to do more measurement, starting with our basic participants, and that's what we intend to do going forward, to say, hey, are we seeing increases among folks who did not elect to be in the advanced training, who did not say, already say, I'm going to commit to taking folks onto my caseload? Are they doing that anyway? And are they carrying those strategies forward? And we're interested as well in looking at the role of additional consultation, and then, ongoing uptake and maintenance of these caseloads going forward, right? Are they taking and keeping folks from the community and in therapy, right? That's sort of the holy grail, right? The kids are actually accessing treatment, and we're bridging that gap. So, in New York, we are going to be looking at, we're recruiting some additional cohorts and additional modules now, based on some of the response things that we wanted to focus on more, that have come up from some discussions. Increased focus on externalizing. A lot of the focus is currently on internalizing, as well as expansion to an adult modified version. And then finally, additionally, we're going to be expanding beyond New York. Again, it's available now in Pennsylvania. I'll show you a QR code in a second for those who are interested in participating in this training. And then also, we are going to be able to be offering CEUs soon. I cannot promise for our first cohort, which starts in like 4 weeks, but we will. That is our plan. So again, we want to take a moment to thank the participants, Story for School Professional Development, which initially was the platform we developed this on, and then our colleagues in implementation. And if you're interested in more information, complete an interest form, and I'm going to go ahead and leave this up as we begin our discussion. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you so much, Matt and Allison. This was really great.